Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Rebellious Counselor Live. Little chill music bringing us in this evening. I'm just going to turn it down and we're going to get started. And I am Liz Stadtlander, marriage and family therapist and mental health counselor, talking about loving addicts, what to do if you're in love with an addict, if you're married to an addict, if you have someone in your family who's an addict. Addiction really touches everybody. And last week we talked a lot about my addiction program, and we talked about just sort of understanding in general terms how to identify an addict and what addiction is. And in case anybody doesn't know what addiction is, it is a dependency. It's a dependency on something to survive. So you can't survive without alcohol, or you think you can't survive without alcohol, drugs, gambling, shopping, food, whatever. I mean, now gaming, porn, there's so many things that people are addicted to nowadays. The list is never ending. And loving an addict is probably one of the most painful, difficult things to do. Yet so many of us do it. So many of us are stuck. I shouldn't say stuck. So many of us have either chosen or not chosen to be in relationships with addicts. And when I say chosen, sometimes we get into relationships with people who have addictions because we don't recognize the addiction. We can't identify it necessarily. It's not something we've ever seen before, so we don't really get what's happening. We don't understand the behavior, or they hide it. Addicts hide things really, really well. And so sometimes they are able to hide it from us, and for, a long time, sometimes years. And sometimes it just happens. Sometimes, you're with somebody, or somebody in your family hits a point where, they have a surgery, and the next thing you know, they're addicted to pills, or they're going through a hard time because somebody died, or they lost their job. And the next thing you know, their drinking is out of control. So it can happen to any of us on either side. I believe that any of us can become addicts. And I believe that, really anybody can love an addict. Probably most of us do. I find it difficult these days to find somebody that hasn't loved an addict, or doesn't have any contact with someone who is an addict. I mean, it's everywhere. So we want to talk about loving an addict because it's painful, it's difficult, and it's very confusing. And so many of my clients come to me because they're in a marriage or have a close family member that is an addict, and the behavior is out of control and they don't know what to do. So our guest tonight was supposed to be Jennifer Wylde, who has her own podcast called Sober Exposure, and primarily focusing on addiction recovery. And we were going to have her here to kind of bounce a conversation off the wall about, what do we tell people who love people that are in the position that you used to be in? But unfortunately, Jennifer is not feeling well. And so she is not able to be here. She's under the weather, but we wish her well. And the show must go on. So we're going on with the topic, and we will definitely have Jennifer back here to talk another time. And if anyone, wants to check out on my page, I've been on Jennifer's podcast called Sober Exposure. You can find it on my Facebook page, my YouTube channel, all over the place. And it's a great interview about functional addiction, and talked more about what we talked about last week. So let's just jump into it. Okay. Let's jump into the loving the addict pool head first. Okay, so first of all, just the basics, right? How do we know? How do we know if we're in if our husband or wife or child or somebody we love is an addict? How do we know? And that might seem obvious for some of you, but believe it or not, it's not always obvious. And the biggest giveaway for anything going on in a relationship that seems odd is always going to be behavior changes. So as soon as we notice, we get to know our family members and our spouses and our boyfriends and girlfriends, our children very, very well. We get to know their patterns. We get to know their speech. We get to know so much about them. We don't even realize it. And so we can be very sensitive to changes in their daily patterns, changes in their daily behavior, and in their overall presentation. So the first sign that somebody might be an addict is just, wow, is their behavior kind of weird? Did I smell something on their breath, when I, kiss them goodnight that I don't usually smell? Or, were they always congested and sniffling and had a bad cough for like the last 3 months? And, they've been very hyper and very go on these rants of conversation, which would be cocaine. Are they nodding off at the table, which would be pills or heroin? Moodiness comes with all of the addictions. Alcohol is usually the most obvious because alcohol is the most sloppy of all the substances that are out there. And so it's very easy to tell if someone's drinking or drinking too much. And because drinking is legal, and we do it at dinner, we do it at our family homes, we do it for celebration and hanging out, people will be drinking in front of us. So we can very easily see, whoa, Elizabeth's been drinking way too much too often. I think we need to have a talk with her. Or you might notice your husband is, pounding, beers and acting like a jerk. And like, it's happening all the time. I hear this from clients all the time, especially in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, where I am from and where I used to live and practice, is, a huge drinking town. So alcoholism all over the place. In Miami, I would say it's not as prevalent because there's a lot more things to do and the weather's beautiful. And so people tend to get involved in healthier lifestyles and do things other than drink. Does that mean there's not alcoholics in Miami? Absolutely not. It's a problem everywhere. And a lot of drugs come in through the borders here. And so drug use, and we used to be in South Florida, the number one manufacturer of pain pills. So we had all the pain pill clinics down here. So it's everywhere, on every coast, in the middle. It's drugs and alcohol are literally everywhere. We have online gambling, casinos, online shopping, online sex. All those vices nowadays are at our fingertips. So it is not uncommon or unlikely for one of our family members or our partner to fall into one of these bad habits, or maybe they've always been. So change in behavior is usually, hey, my partner, my son, my daughter, my sister, whatever, is acting kind of weird. They're not showing up on time. They smell. They're falling asleep at the table. They've had a bad cough for 3 months, and their nose shape is changing. And you might be laughing or thinking, is this serious? But this happens all the time. But when you're on the other side and you're loving the addict, you first start denying and writing off what you noticed in the beginning, and you say, that was in my head. Did he smell like alcohol on regular night or something? Was it just me? And so does the bathroom stink like pot, or is it just me? Or were they sniffing an awful lot and going through a lot of Kleenex that's kind of unusual, or is it just me, right? So all of these things that to a lot of us might be like, oh, that's so obvious. When you love somebody and you're in a relationship with somebody and you see them in the best light and you love them, it's not so obvious. It's not so obvious. And addicts are notoriously good at lying, manipulating, and hiding. So if you're on the other side of the addiction and you discover that this has been going on behind your back, under your nose. Don't feel guilty and don't feel shameful, because that's usually the first go-to emotion. How could I be so stupid? How didn't I see this? How could I have ignored all these signs? They were so obvious. And, don't feel guilty. I had a client call me the other day and, found out that his, wife had, ran up like, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of dollars in credit card debt. He had no idea. Okay. And I feel so stupid. And it's like, don't feel stupid, because you, the non-addict, the person who loves the addict, is just living their life, doing what they have to do, going to work, taking care of the kids, whatever it is that you do in your life. And you're not necessarily expecting this to just happen. And it does. So the behavior changes will be your first sign. The smell, the look, the behavior, the eyes. You might notice dilated pupils. You might notice just really weird behavior from your kids. And then usually what happens is the person who's in love with the addict will, avoid, deny. I didn't really see that. That's not really happening. I don't know why I just found all this porn on my husband's phone. Oh, all guys watch porn. No big deal. And it's no big deal until it becomes a big deal. So addictions tend to fester like a bed sore or something negative, a wound literally that is not treated. And it can go, under the radar to even the best of us. Meaning the best of us, the sharpest of us, the most aware, because it's not in your, how do I say? It's not in your wheelhouse. It's not the way you think. It's not what you do. Maybe it's nothing you've been exposed to. So people who've been exposed to addiction, maybe growing up or themselves, they're much better at nailing it. They can usually tell from, a mile away. But I'm telling you, when it comes to somebody you love, you will make all the excuses in the world of why it's not actually happening. And it will have to hit you so hard, not because you're stupid, not because there's anything wrong with you, but because the addict is so good at lying, hiding, and manipulating. And the reason they're so good at lying, hiding, and manipulating is because that addiction to them is life. It is their lifeblood, and they are not about to give it up. They can't imagine living without it. So they will do everything and anything to survive, right? So survival to an addict is keep snorting my cocaine, keep drinking my alcohol, keep slamming my beers, keep spending the money, keep binging on the food. Even food bingers that I've worked with, they're very good at hiding. They won't eat in front of other people. So you go out to dinner and you think, oh, they're just, normal, healthy eater, or they don't even eat that much when you go out to dinner with them. And then they go home and they just tear it up. Okay. So this is the way addiction works. And when you are on the other side of it, it is daunting, it's confusing, and it's scary. So once you kind of identify and the addiction becomes so pronounced and such a big problem in your life that you can no longer not address it, the person on the other side, the person who loves the addict, has, now been put in a very uncomfortable situation, and a situation where they now must decide what they're going to do about it. And this is usually when my phone rings or my email dings that there's a crisis, please call me as soon as possible. And usually when I get crisis calls, it's either an affair or an addiction. So when it's addiction, usually the pattern, what will happen is, trouble's been brewing in the home over this, addiction for a while. I mean, sometimes it can be a year, it can be years, it could be 6 months, it can be all different time frames. But whatever the bad behavior of the addict is, it gets so destructive and so big that the person who loves them just says, wow, despite me loving them, like, I have to do something about this because they're going to wind up killing themselves or putting us into debt or, killing somebody else or whatever. And so they finally will freak out and they will call me. And so, unfortunately, loving an addict it's so it messes with your mind when you're the lover of the addict. It really messes with your mind because for so much time you're going back and forth. Now I would know if they were doing that. No, that can't be. You get a call from a friend, a family member, hey, so and so is using these drugs, or so and your husband's drinking and did this at the restaurant and embarrassed himself, and so it's very it's very confusing because you don't want to see it. It's kind of like when I always call it the Bill Cosby syndrome, because it's like when we see someone in the public eye that we trust and we love, and then we find out that they're not anything like we thought they were. We just, at first, there's like shock, denial, disbelief. No way. There's no way that, Bill Cosby raped anybody. There's no way Michael Jackson molested anybody. And I'm not getting into those stories, but to be able to digest that someone you put on a pedestal or someone that you really love can be flawed when you've seen them as perfect, or when you've seen them as, wonderful, is very, very daunting and very, very disturbing. So I get the call, and usually the addict or the abuser of substances or the dependent, out of control one using the substance gets dragged in or threatened that either you go to therapy and fix this or else, right? Or else I'm leaving. Or, they will come in as a couple, and the addict will actually blame the spouse who's not the addict, the person who's bringing them into therapy, the partner who's bringing them into therapy, as crazy, and she doesn't know what she's talking about, and she's exaggerating, and she's making this up, and it's because I'm drinking because she drives me crazy, or I'm doing drugs because he's a jerk. And they addicts will always deny and blame. So when you're on the other side of that and you love this person, and you're afraid that they're going to kill themselves or lose their job, or disappoint the children or the family or whatever, and they're flipping it on you, it's quite a feeling of betrayal and violation of your love, whether it's a child parent or whether it's a spouse. I mean, it doesn't matter. It feels like a violation. It feels like a betrayal. And sometimes we can work with the addict, and we'll get them to, say, yes, I need help, because the addict, despite the problem, loves their family and loves their life and themselves more than the substance. But a lot of times, unfortunately, people will have to lose everything and everyone until they realize that they need help. And even then, they might still not want to change. They may still say, no, you know what? I'd rather do that cocaine or have that drink instead of be married to you, or, be with this family. Because when the addict is actively using, their brain is scrambled, and they will continually deflect onto you, the lover of the addict. So it's not a very easy position to be in. And I have a lot of compassion for people who are in this position. And let me tell you, I have quite a number of those people as my clients, and have over the years, and have literally held the hands of so many people going through hell with the addict until they finally get ready to, to cut the cord or to leave. Somebody asked me a very good question yesterday. One of my clients asked me a question, Elizabeth, at what point does the person who's the addict realize, hey, I really need some help? This is a problem. At what point? And it's a really, really good question to ask. And I was a little bit stopped in my tracks by this question because it's so difficult to answer and because it's really different for everybody. It's not the same for everyone. So there are people who, again, will be so disturbed at the idea of losing everything or losing their family or losing their spouse that there's still a part of them that's reachable, and you can get them to connect to you and understand how you feel. But more often than not, when a person is really heavily using and actively using, they don't hear what you say. They don't care. They're numbed out from what they're using, and they really don't want to give it up because to them it seems impossible and like insurmountable. So when you're on the other side of that and you're wondering, when are they going to wake up? When are they going to wake up? When are they going to realize? I don't have an answer for you. It could be never. It could be when they lose everything. And some people in the addiction field is, oh, well, you have to hit rock bottom for you to really get help. And, I don't believe that to be true. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes people have to lose everything and then they wake up and go, oh my God, what did I lose? What did I do? Okay, I'll get help. But not all the time. Many people, especially the longer they've been using, the harder it is to get them to come to terms with the problem. The longer they're using and get away with it, the less they see it as a problem at all. And they will tell you, well, it's not a problem. So what if I drink? Or so what if I pop pills? Or so what if I look at porn? Or so every day? Or so what if I snort cocaine every day? I'm functional. I'm good. I don't need help. And they honestly believe that. And you can say, you're going to die of a heart attack, or you're going to kill someone in a car, or you're going to put us in debt, or whatever, and they just won't hear you. So the longer you use, the harder and less likely it is that you will seek help or own it. However, I've seen everything. I've seen people who have used for 25 years, on their own, just decide they don't want to do this anymore. I've seen people, have to go through losing everything. And I mean families, and they still don't get help. I've seen, one conversation with a spouse and a partner get them to go for help. So don't think that there's like an exact answer for this, because there's not. And so that then puts even more pressure on the person who loves the addict, because there is no guaranteed answer to this problem. There's no guaranteed time frame, and there's no guarantee that it will get better, and there's no guarantee that it will get worse. So it forces the person who loves the addict to really have to dig deep and do some serious soul searching about how they want to handle this. And that's usually when they pop into, my life and to my practice. So the something that's so common is the lover of the addict will come in and say, I don't want to lose my family, and and I love him or I love her, and Elizabeth, isn't there any way they're going to change? Is there anything I can do? And there are things that you can try, and I will always guide my clients through things that they can try, but they have to live with that uncertainty that this might not work. This might not work. And I have to decide if I want to stick around to see if it's going to work or not, because there's a lot of damage and a lot of destruction that can be done when you're dealing and loving an addict. And if Jenn was here, she would tell you, as a former addict, that that's the truth. Addiction is destructive. It is hurtful when you're on the other side of it. And it is definitely normally typically progressive. So if it's a problem today, it's going to be double the problem probably in a year. But again, let me reiterate clearly, that there is no guarantee of the trajectory of any addiction. I could tell you that certain addictions are much more difficult, and the statistics are there to back up that, there are certain addictions that are much harder to resolve. There are certain addictions that are more destructive than others. But generally speaking, if someone tells you for sure that, oh yeah, this person can get better, they can change, or even that they're going to be a definite disaster, we really don't know that. We can only go by what we've seen, and we can go by what we felt. And the lover of the addict, so unfortunately, blames themselves, feels guilty, and feels like if they confront the addict, that they're going to lose that person, that they're going to lose that relationship, or they'll have such turmoil with that person that they can't handle it. And so they often choose to just keep letting it go until, like I said before, it just gets too big and too destructive. So I try to walk people through the, they feel shame, like, I'm so ashamed that I let this go this long, or I'm so ashamed that I didn't say anything earlier. I'm so sad, ashamed that I didn't see it. I feel guilty. It's my fault. And again, the addict loves to blame others for the reason that they use. They are just famous for it. And it's hard to hear this, I know, if you're watching and you have somebody in your family that you love who's an addict. And believe me, I understand that. But I speak the truth. I live it every day in my practice. And I've had, unfortunately, a bit of addiction with people I've loved. So I really understand the guilt. I really understand the struggle that people go through. And it's very difficult to get through. So when you love an addict, you have to decide, how do I want to approach this? I'm afraid. I'm scared of losing this person. I'm scared of losing this relationship. Elizabeth, how do I approach this? What do I say? What do I do? So we have that issue. And then we have to decide at some point, do I stay or do I go? What do I do? So, okay, so let's look at this. So what is the approach? Most approaches, to me, are always wrong and backwards. And again, I am the rebellious counselor, so I tend to see things kind of in a defiant or oppositional way than, conventional society. But, we're shown things like interventions, and people pay top dollar to have somebody like myself come into their home and, intervene and get the person to go to therapy or to a rehab center. They will threaten, that's the most common. I'm going to leave if you don't, go get help and clean yourself up. And the problem with interventions and idle threats is that they never really work. I mean, I'm sure they do once in a while, but what happens is the person who loves the addict will threaten, and then the addict will manipulate, flip the situation around, lie, make up stories to the point where you just don't want to deal with it. You're just so turned off, and you feel like you're banging your head against the wall, and you feel like your whole life is right on the line right now. And it's not coming from the addict. It's coming from you hiring the interventionalist, or coming from you, threatening them to go to therapy or bust, but they're usually empty threats. When people threaten, I've noticed in families and marriages, it's very empty. They're very empty threats. So I always tell people, don't say anything. Don't go in threatening if you're not going to back it up. Because if you threaten to leave your spouse, if they don't get help or they don't quit and they disappoint you and they don't do either one of those, now what are you going to do? Now your voice has become a joke to them. All you are is yip-yapping idle threats, and they just blow you off. And they keep lying, and they keep hiding, and they keep manipulating and turning things around and shifting, because they are in their minds surviving because they cannot live without this substance, or nowadays this thing. Okay. So you can't take it personally. How could they, I hear, well, how could they lie to me? That's what addicts do. They lie. They lie to cover their tracks. They lie to be able to continue the behavior. And when you get a former addict, they will be the first to tell you that that's what we do. We lie and manipulate to protect our addiction, because the addiction always comes first. It comes before the spouse. It comes before the kids. And they will say, the addicts will come in and say, oh, I love my kids. My kids come first. Well, that's not true, because you're drinking and passing out in front of your children. That's not putting your children first. I would never do anything to hurt my wife. That's a lie, because you are hurting her or him every day with your addictive and destructive behavior. So there's so much bullshit that goes on when you're dealing with addiction that it can be very frustrating for the person who loves the addict. And not only is it frustrating, it can be sickening. It can be frustrating. It can make you feel lost and you don't know what to do. So my suggestion is go to therapy and work on you first before you decide that you're going to make any big moves or big threats to your addict child or wife or husband or brother, sister, because you have to be prepared to walk. If you say you're going to walk, you got to walk, because if you say you're going to walk and you don't walk, you've just lost your leverage in getting this person help. So I try to work with the person for as long as it takes until they are ready to say, okay, Elizabeth, I'm serious. I have a plan, because we have to go, where are you going to go? Who's going to leave the house? You know, how's this all going to go down? Where do you want them to get help? Where do you want them to get? I mean, there's so much to cover before you just jump in and say, okay, go get help or get out. Because they're going to be like, whatever. Yeah, you yell at me all the time, and that's why I drink. The kids drive me crazy, and that's why I pop pills, right? I mean, you name it, you'll hear it all. So you really have to be in a very stable place, a very strong place, to be able to confront this person whom you love so much, who's an addict, if you want some sort of change to happen, which again is not guaranteed. So the approach I like to take once I get that person, the lover of the addict, feeling good about themselves, you know, feeling connected, understanding the behavior, understanding what's going on, coming up with a plan. The approach that I recommend is something like this. Instead of going in with anger and put downs and screaming and yelling and fights that, oh, they go on in addictive homes all the time. What a waste of energy. The way to approach it is to sit your child, or of course, children are different if they're under 18, and that's kind of another show in itself. But you sit down with your spouse, you sit down with your family member, and you say, listen, I love you. You know, I married you, or, you know, from the time I grew up in the house with you, or whatever you say, I have loved you and I have seen you in this way. And it's positive, right? I've seen you as a wonderful human being. I've seen you as a wonderful part of this family. I've seen you as, you know, my best friend. I've seen you in whatever wonderful way that you see them. But now I'm really scared, and I'm really sad that the person that I have always loved is, you know, has disappeared or been taken over by, or has allowed themselves to be taken over by, you know, blank, drugs, alcohol, porn, that gambling, blah, blah, whatever. And I cannot, you know, I love myself way too much and I love you too much to stand by and watch you kill yourself, because that is what addicts are doing. They're slowly suicidal. They're very slowly trying to kill themselves. Ugly as it is, it's the truth, right? They're trying to kill themselves. So they don't realize it necessarily, but they don't care about their bodies. They don't care about their lives. They're so wrapped up in this substance or this thing. So you say, I've loved you so much. I will always love you. I will always hold you in my mind the way you were when you were not using this thing. But it's gotten to a point where I am too hurt. Every day I am hurting. Every day I am hurt watching you do this to yourself. Every day I am hurting watching you behave like this in front of the children, or, concerned about the children finding out. And I love myself and my children way too much and you way too much to stand by and watch this. So I'm going to give you two options. And this is it, guys. Don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. I'm going to give you two options: get help or get out. And I know that sounds really, really, really harsh. And it is really, really harsh. And anyone who's been an addict and is recovered will tell you Elizabeth is right. Because you're telling them in a loving way that you fell in love with one version, or you've loved and will remember, always see them in this best version of themselves, but that they are no longer behaving like that. And that it's too painful for you to watch somebody you love destroy their lives, and that you're not going to allow their problems to destroy your life, or the children's life, or the family, or whomever, whatever. And it's that simple. It's literally that simple. The problem that we see in the cycles of addiction is that people, unfortunately, they make so much drama out of it because they're scared and they're chaotic and they don't know what to do. So they get locked into this cycle of this threat after that threat, and they talk to their friends and what do you think I should do and how should I handle it? And they call everybody in the universe until the last person they call is a therapist. And then when they come to the therapist, it's so far down the line, it's tough to maneuver, but doable. But all the drama and the time that you spent chit-chatting with all your family members and friends about what should you do and what move should you make and how should you handle this, while you're busy doing all that, all you did was make your own life miserable, on top of already being miserable because your partner or family member is going down the tubes from addiction, when it could really be a very simple, loving conversation. You just have to mean it. You have to mean it. And if you're not ready to mean it, don't bother having the conversation, because you're just making yourself live in a living hell. And it takes a lot of therapy, I think, sometimes to get to that place where you can be very serious about it and very loving and very straightforward about it. Threatening to take the kids away, threatening to call the cops, threatening this, threatening that, it's a waste of time, and it makes you, the lover of the addict, lose, again, all of your dignity and all of your leverage for your own well-being. Now, if you're listening, you're probably thinking, oh my God, but I love him, but I love her, but I love this, but I love my son, but I love it. I understand that. And I'm not, believe me, I'm saying it straight, but I'm not saying it's easy. It's not. It's probably the hardest decision you will ever make in your life, or one of the hardest decisions that you will ever have to make in your life. It is not easy. I'm not sure where in the rule book it says that life is supposed to be easy. So life is not always easy. Maybe it is supposed to be easy, I'm starting to think, and we make it really complicated, but we all have to face these difficult decisions in life. And when somebody is an addict, or dependent on a substance, or however you want to frame it, you have to remember that you can never force another person to behave the way you want them to. As much as we all wish that we could, we can't. So the best thing you can do for an addict is to make a decision that best benefits yourself, and let them have to adjust to your decision that you make in your best interest. And I know it's a lot more complicated in a lot of situations than I'm making it out to be. A lot of times, the addict will threaten suicide, and so on and so forth. And when they do that, I tell the partner, call 911. What are you waiting for? I don't want to embarrass them. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. Well, what's more embarrassing? Having him dead or her dead for your children, everyone to see, or calling 911 and getting him the help that he needs or she needs. So, you have to be very cut and dry when it comes to dealing with addicts. And we have to look at addiction. I don't like to look at it necessarily as a disease. You can argue till you're blue in the face. People say, oh, it's a brain disease. It's such a sad disease. I hate this disease. Some people believe it's a choice. I'm sort of somewhere in the middle. I understand that it is pathological, and I understand that it progresses typically, but not sold that it's a disease per se that happens to somebody like cancer. Okay, I'm not buying that. I understand that it can change, your brain chemistry, and I understand all of that. And I understand that we can put a frame around it that calls it, an illness, a mental illness. And we can understand that, if your partner had cancer, you wouldn't dance around the subject. You would not threaten them to go to the doctor. It would just be like, okay, yeah, we need to go to the doctor. We need to take care of this. Where with behavioral health and mental health, because we can't see things on scans and everything is sort of up for interpretation, there's more of a gray area where, it's a little easier to sneak out of that framework and, kind of story it however you want. And there's no necessarily right or wrong way to frame it or story it. I guess it's up to you. But the bottom line remains the same. And the bottom line is that the addict needs help. The addict oftentimes is unaware that you're aware, or that other people are aware that they are not well. They lack insight. Another question I get from people all the time who love addicts say, how do they not see, how destructive their behavior is? How do they not understand what they're doing? Well, when your brain's altered and you're high all the time, or you're drunk all the time, I mean, your insight into yourself is like zero, right? Zilch, not there. So we have these expectations of people who are literally drunk and high all the time to be able to say, yes, I think I'm doing a little too much. It's time for me to clean up and get some help. That does happen, but it's not the typical way that the story unfolds. I have seen it, and it's very impressive. I've seen it, but it's not the typical story. The typical story is the toxicity, the destructive cycles, the enabling, which those of us who love addicts often do. We love and we think we're helping them by covering it up or picking up the pieces that they drop, but we're really enabling the addiction. And I know that aside from, possibly suicidal threats being in there, we might also have co-occurring problems. So in other words, let's say you have, someone who's bipolar and they're using cocaine, or they are, they have a really bad anxiety disorder, and so they drink to get rid of the anxiety. So a lot of times you have these co-occurring things happening, and they're a little more complex to treat because you have to treat more than just one thing. And with addiction, often comes co-occurring personality disorders, and other, mental health disorders that can complicate it. But again, at the end of the day, it's very simple. I love you. I see you this way. I'll always think of you and love you in this wonderful way in which you always were. And I can no longer continue to hurt myself every day, or our family, or stand by and watch you kill yourself, because it doesn't make me feel good. And so since you don't care about yourself and you don't care about how you're making me feel right now, I have to take care of me. So you have two options, right? Just two: get help or get out. And when you are approaching it that strong, you approach it like that, you'll be very surprised at the very good results you get. But when you drag your feet and dance and sing around it for years and months, and threats and empty threats and idle threats, you are wasting your time, and you are making yourself almost just as sick as the addict. So a lot of times as the therapist, I have to kind of pull these two destructive forces away from each other and say, look, guys, this is what's going on. This is what's happening here. And the addict, once they, get themselves straightened up and cleaned up, then everything can change in the relationship, in the life. But if you just let it go on and continue, then you're giving your life away. And a lot of people want to be the martyr. But I love him so much, but I love her so much, but I love them so much. I could never leave them, or I could never, do this or do that. And it's like, okay, I understand, but what other choice do you have? So if they're not willing to get help, then okay, I'll say this to my clients. I don't know how many times a week I say this to my clients. Okay, so you're not going to say anything. You're not going to do anything. And you're just going to give your life away to this person who's treating you like crap and, doing all these destructive things to yourself and to you, to themselves and to you. And you're going to say, you know what? My life's not worth it. I think I'll just live a miserable life so they can just, be okay. So they don't have to be embarrassed, or they don't have to be upset, or they don't have to be. So there's so much work that needs to be done with the person who loves the addict, because a lot of times, they have so many issues too, issues with boundaries, issues with worthiness and loving themselves, and understanding how to really deal head on with an issue or something that is really hurting them. Every addiction comes with its own little bag of goodies. Is a drinking, alcohol addiction going to be treated the same way as a porn addiction, the same way as a shopping addiction or gaming addiction? Not necessarily in treatment phase, but as far as getting that person to treatment, yeah, it's all the same, right? Because when you love that addict, you are so vulnerable, and you have to take care of yourself because they're unable to take care of the needs of relationships and family. And so you really are up against the wall there, and you can drag it out. You can call a million people, read a million books, watch a million videos. The bottom line will remain stable, that you have to get help or you have to get out. And whether you leave or you ask them to leave or whatever, that's going to vary from situation to situation. I always look at, when it's about who should leave, who's the sober one and who's the responsible one? If you're sober and you're responsible and you're the one who's taking care of the house and the kids and everything else, why should you be disturbed? Why should you be disturbed? Let that person go drink or drug themselves to death somewhere else, right? But a lot of times the addict refuses to leave. And so we then have to come up with a plan for the person who loves them. So it's a very painful situation. And as harshly as I'm speaking about it tonight, is just as, that there's that much compassion there that I really do feel for both the addict, but I think probably more so the person who loves the addict, because, it's not fair. It's really not fair. But you know what? So much of life is not fair. Cancer is not fair. Violent crime isn't fair. Poverty isn't fair. I could go on and on. I mean, there's so much about life that's unfair, but we have a choice how we're going to respond to that. And at the end of the day, we have to do what's best for ourselves, because especially when you're dealing with an addict, if you don't, then certainly nobody else will. So, heavy show tonight, but a good show, an important show that I think we can all relate to, that I think everyone needs to hear, because we're all touched by addiction in one way or the other, whether it's us or someone that we love or someone that we're married to or someone that we're very close to. And there is a sense of loss when somebody that you love becomes an addict, because that person that you love isn't really there anymore. They're buried so deep inside of the addiction that you can't really count on them or anticipate that they can meet any kind of need in any kind of relationship. And you do have to suffer the loss of that person. And it's very sad. There's children who grow up in homes with addict parents, which is always heartbreaking, because the children didn't ask to be born. They didn't ask to be put in that situation. And I think parents have a responsibility to take care of their children, but unfortunately, it doesn't always happen that way. And so it's up to people like us in the mental health field to be able to be a resource or a guide for people who are in these situations. And there is always hope. What you might be hoping that they get better, the person you love gets better and gets cleaned up. I mean, it's good to have hope, but it's not necessarily going to be the outcome. So I encourage you, if this is you, if you are a lover of an addict, that you put yourself first and you take care of yourself and do what you need to do to make your life meaningful and content for yourself, because you deserve that. So on that note, if you know somebody or you are somebody that loves an addict or is an addict themselves, I am there for you. I am there for both sides of it. I'm there for the addict, and I have a program for some addicts if they qualify. But if you love the addict, you need therapy just as much as the addict does. Don't be ashamed. Don't feel guilty. Don't feel bad. Anybody could be in your position at any given time. So there's never any judgment. I can be reached at actuation-counseling.com, actuation-counseling.com, or through any of the social media outlets that you may be watching me on: YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. And I hope that you will not be shy about asking for help, because we all need it sometime. I am the Rebellious Counselor. You've been watching the Rebellious Counselor live every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. Until next week, be safe and take care of yourself. Thank you for watching.